Hello, welcome back to Map Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math and Alan Wake, a story about stories, writers, light, and darkness. And it's a game that shares a universe with one of my favorite games of all time, and that is awesome. And it's an excellent game in its own right, to be sure. It does some different things, and it's crazy that it wasn't talked about more when it came out. I'm just saying. Um, but yeah, so here's how this video is going to go. I'm going to talk about Alan Wake. I'm going to talk about how math is used throughout the game, just to get that conversation started. And of course, if you want to add to it, please do. And all the while, I'll be talking about how I felt about the title, which I mean, you can already tell I dug it. But yeah, so I'll be talking about different beats in along the way. So if you want to go in completely unaware with Alan Wake, you can feel free to avoid this. I will not take that personally. But if you don't care or you've already played Alan Wake, please feel free to do so. And I will also say though, like I will mention like the link with control. So if you want to avoid that, I get it too. But so just assume spoilers are ahead to be safe. But if you don't care or you've already played these games, yeah, stick around for the ride because I'm gonna have some fun. I hope you do too. All right, spoilers ahead. Just assume that. Let's get started. All right, so with Alan Wake, it's a lot of things. It's about the titular character, Alan Wake, a writer, a famous one within the universe of the game. And so throughout the game, you explore the different world of Alan Wake. Bright Falls is the city that you're in the game. A lot of weird, crazy stuff happens, and as you explore the world, you are exploring the story. You're exploring the story in, the meta sense, right? But in the game, like the literal sense, because you are in a story, which is just it's crazy because like it they really play with the meta aspect of things, and they have fun, and they play with you, and they play with narratives and what you expect out of writers, what you expect out of stories, what's expected out of you. And you get to make decisions in the game, but as you get to explore, you're being guided, right? You're being guided within the game, but also in the meta context by the people who have made the game. And I think that's cool. And they play around with tropes. There's a lot of good moments. And if we focus in on the math, there's math in how that story unfolds into you, math in the number of episodes that story plays out over, and why that was decided and what's in those episodes. But that's not all, right? There's math in the music, there's math in the voice acting, and I'll get into those a little bit as we go on. But I want to focus in on the gameplay for now. There's math in the gameplay. There's a lot of math in the gameplay. So with Alan Wake, it's a lot of things, right? It's a story about stories, so you got the whole meta aspect. As far as the gameplay is concerned, there's more adventure, very like narrative-based adventure sort of gameplay that it falls into, but there's also a decent amount of segments where it falls into the more survival horror slash shooter sort of deal, and you go back and forth between those. Sometimes you know what's going to happen next. Sometimes you don't, and you just kind of go back and forth. And as you play, there's math in like the items that you can collect. And one of those types of items that you could collect are the manuscripts, and those manuscripts help flesh out the game, make it feel more surreal because the manuscripts are written by your character that you're playing as. And so you're like, at a certain point, you're like, well, is the Alan Wake that you're playing actually Alan Wake, or is the Alan Wake you're playing a character in the story? And I feel like by the end of it, you do get an answer, and it's kind of both. But that's up for you to figure out if what I said had any validity. If you've already played, then you have a better understanding of that, right? But that's not all, though, right? So not only is there math in the collectibles, with the favorite being like for me the manuscripts because they help flesh things out about the game, like they say things about the past, they say things about the future. They add that surreal element to it. Will continue to add surreal elements to it, but there's math in the actual like combat, right? And when you're collecting things, you're not just collecting collectibles, but you're collecting items that you can use in combat, items that you can use to help you out as you play throughout the game. And so, as you're playing throughout the game, as you're going through combat, you're, one of your main weapons is light. You got to use a light to make your opponents vulnerable, and then you can shoot them or use other items on them. And um, well, I was gonna say like you could shoot them like with a revolver, but then there's also like shotguns and stuff like that, and flare guns, and you also can use just regular flares, as well as flashbangs. Um, and so as you go throughout the game, there's math in the items that you're collecting and what they do. So with the light, right, it makes your opponents vulnerable, and you can press a button to boost that light. And here's the thing: not only is there math in that light and how it's used, like and how long it takes to get to the opponent that you're facing, there's math in uh, intensifying the light and what it does because it will make your opponent vulnerable more quickly. But there's also math in the batteries, right? And how much batteries are being used, or sorry, there's math in the battery usage. Same way to say the, sorry, different way to say the same thing. But anyway, so there's math in the light, how it functions, how it flows, um, it getting to your opponent, you boosting it because you have to hold down the button, um, and then there's math in what it does to your enemy, which makes them vulnerable quicker, but it also takes up battery life. So you got to decide what you want to do, but you're also collecting batteries along the way. Um, and then, like, continuing with the idea of resource management from that battery life use, um, you're collecting ammo, whether it's bullets for different guns that you have, or flares or flashbangs. And with the flares, um, they cause your enemies to retreat. So, you know, you're building up those, but you have to decide if the timing makes sense for you to use that, right? They're good for crowd control, good for pushing your opponents back. They won't necessarily damage them, but they're useful. And they can't get caught in the light, which makes them easier to become more vulnerable. And then you have stuff like outside of the traditional like shooting, because right, the idea is like for a lot of the game, right, you're using your light and you're shooting a gun. Um, and with the flashbangs and the flare gun in particular, they're really good at crowd control, and they're either going to like one hit KO your opponents, or you know, they'll make them easier to damage. Right, you get the job done faster. So you have to manage these resources that come to you, and like throughout the game, you're building up your stock. But you know, you might be at a different segment, just in the next minute, and you don't have that stuff anymore, or you know, you're in a different episode and you don't have that stuff anymore, so you have to build things up, you have to collect. And there's math in all that. There's math in resource management, there's math in using your light, using your weapons, and then as you're going through those segments, you know, there's lamp posts, and those lamp posts make it so that your opponents won't or they can't hurt you. If they're like the crazy shadow birds, they sometimes dive in and they kill themselves by doing that. But in any case, um, with those lampposts, they work as checkpoints, and you know from where you'll be like starting from if you were like if you got a game over, and there, you know, there's math in how that all works, right? Because you're temporarily invulnerable while you're doing that, and it serves as the next checkpoint, right? Or one of them. And in some cases, you have to start a generator to get that working. And there's several points where you're starting a generator in a game for different purposes. But there's math in how that all works, right? Because with the generators, you start them up and you have the wheel going around and you have to press the button at the right time and then catch it the following times to make sure it works. And you know, there's math in that, how it gets across to you and what you're doing and its purpose, right? And so there's math across the gameplay in Alan Wake, notably, it's a bit more visible in combat, but there's math in the scale and the scope of the games, and how characters and objects are proportioned, how you're moving throughout those different parts of the game. And again, like back to the story, how it gets across to you, how it functions, how it flows, how you're exploring it, and at the same time, how you're being guided as you explore. Because you're exploring, sure, but the game wants you to see certain things, right? So they have to play that game of giving you that exploration experience while guiding you down the path. And I think it works really well within the context of the game because that's what's happening in the story of the game. like, so it's just kind of a crazy awesome game to me. And there's a lot of math across the board. And like I said earlier, there's math in the music, how it's composed, how it makes you feel, if it's looped, how that works, how that functions, how that flows. Math and that the instruments being played with that, math and just every conceivable area. Like I mentioned, the voice acting as well, and there's math in that. There's math in the breathing involved. There's math in the inflection in the words. Um, how those words make you feel, the different values in which they're spoken, the deliberate decisions that are taken to imbue those words with emotion. There's math in all of it, and there's math in like the programming with the game. There's math in the budget and development that were for it. I played the remastered version and math in adapting that for a more present modern day. Um, and so I think that's all pretty cool. And there's so much more you could say math wise with Alan Wake. So at this point, though, I want to talk about the story a bit more. The link that is shared with Control. And like I said, spoilers are his, so keep that in mind. So Alan Wake is a good game, to say the least. It's excellent. A lot of people talk very highly of it, and rightfully so. And here's what's interesting about it for me, among other things. I played Control. Control shares a universe with Alan Wake. When you play Control throughout the game, um, as you uncover the mysteries of that world, one of the things that's mentioned in it and that you get bits and pieces of is the Bright Falls incident, what happens in Alan Wake. And there's DLC with Control explicitly about that. It's fun, but I didn't have the same context that I do now, So I think that enhances it, and it's like it's interesting because like I played Control first, and then I played Alan Wake, and so it's like, well then, how would it have gone the other way if you played Alan Wake first, and then Control. If you've had that experience, please feel free to share it with me. It's also interesting to me that these games came out a decade apart. The original Alan Wake came out in 2010, while Control came out in 2019. But yeah, so in any case, they share a universe. What happens in Alan Wake, it has happened in Control too. And on the horizon, Alan Wake is coming out at the time of this recording in 2023. And I haven't heard a lot about Control 2, but that is slated to come out. And last I heard, 2024. I would like to hear and see more about that game. Just saying, Control is an amazing game, and it's cool that like it shares a universe with Alan Wake. And back to Alan Wake, it says so much about stories in that game and how they unfold and the power of darkness and creating despite that darkness or because of it rather, and how that all works. And I feel like they really play around with writing, and they do a good job of kind of giving it this like film noir quality. Really play around and you know tropes for building up stories, right? Because like I feel like in a lot of games, you might run into lore, you might run into like different texts, and the text might serve a different purpose. It still gives you a window into the world, but maybe it's like someone's journal entry or something like this. Here, like if it's like something like the manuscripts that you're collecting, they're being you have the option of them being read, and they're written in such a way that you expect them to come from a book, especially one of that like mystery genre. I don't know why I did the whole thing like that, but I think they did a good job of getting that sort of thing across. And it was a great game. It's just like so when I started playing it. I'm like, okay, so two things were like clear from the jump. One, the game is like deliberately weird and unsettling and surreal, which I dig. And two, Alan Wake is kind of a jerk. And they play around with that in the game too. I think it's like just it's such a fascinating title. If you've played it, please let me know what you think of it. If you haven't and you stuck around, what I said shouldn't dissuade you. If you hear like the spoilers throughout, you should still play it because there's so much in that game that I can't really convey to you. But I think it's awesome. There's a lot of math in it, a lot about stories, a lot about art, and I just think that's cool. And I can't get over that. It's shares a universe with Control, but that's how I knew about it in the first place. I hadn't really heard of Alan Wake before that, or at the very least, I wouldn't have remembered if I heard it or not. But in Control, they mention it, and I'm like, okay, and it's like, huh, that's a game. I'm like, interesting. And it took me a while to like get there and play it, but here I am. I've played it now, and it's awesome. So with that in mind, that's about all I have to say for Alan Wake at the moment. Story about stories, writing, light in darkness, and it's a game that shares a universe with one of my favorite games, and that is awesome.